Greetings shippers, welcome back, and it's time to take a look at a pairing that has been around since the inception of modern shipping, that being shipping as many people now recognize it. A pairing that continues to be a femme/favorite to this day. This is gonna take us to a fandom that has been ongoing for quite a while, but is usually quiet in the background and not often in sharp focus. We're gonna be talking about Scooby Doo. Now Scooby Doo has a dedicated, if not overly large, shipping fan base, and the show has produced a variety of pairings, but today we're gonna be focusing on Daphne and Velma. This video was voted for by the lovely people over on Patreon who help keep us focused, on track, and get some of those more obscure or older ships out there. So thanks so much, and I think we're all excited for some Scooby snacks. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please be sure to follow on social media so you can stay up to date with what's coming up next and just when we're doing some streams and general fandom stuff. It's a good time, I swear. And now, let's get ready to solve the mystery as to why people have been shipping these two for so long. It's not merely a mystery, it's just a good segue. Before we get started, a brief overview of the long, intricate history that comprises Scooby Doo. Scooby Doo was first released in 1969 on CBS, produced by Hanna-Barbera, with the concept ultimately being fine-tuned by writers Joe Ruby and Ken Spears. The gang was created to cash in on the rise in that time period teen band craze, and was originally supposed to be about a teen rock group who solved mysteries in between gigs. The first template for the teens were the Archies. Yes, Riverdale's the Archies. However, they were eventually swapped for Dobie Gillis, and the teens were modified to be based on characters from the sitcom The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. After some tweaks, including what sort of dog Scooby should be, as well as many pre-Scooby name changes, and eventually dropping the band angle altogether, as well as toning down the fear factor, the gang was ready to solve some mysteries in their first short-lived series, Scooby Doo, Where Are You?
Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We got some work to do now. Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We need some help from you now.
The series aired from 1969 to 1970 and was a success, thriving despite being placed opposite ABC's Hardy Boys series. From the start, the teens' roles were clearly defined and would remain so with some slight tweaks, the most occurring with Daphne, who would keep her penchant for charging into situations without fully assessing them first, but would gain the ability to defend herself and be kidnapped less often. Though an argument could also be made for variance in Fred, though that tends to more reflect tone, and is not always consistent. And there seems to be a push in certain iterations these days to have Velma veer towards the more traditionally feminine. As with many of these readings, a lot of it is up to the preferences of the creators. The teens quickly became recognizable figures in pop culture, and in the 70s, films began to be produced and numerous canon crossovers occurred, a tendency recently revived by long-running Supernatural series Supernatural in their episode Scooby Natural. However, the 70s and 80s were a bit less kind to the crew, with a network change bringing in spin-offs to the point of oversaturation, and introducing many side characters who at the time were well received, but have not aged very well and are not fondly remembered. Where most people's recollections, or at least new fans, get back on board is with 2002's revival cartoon What's New Scooby Doo, wherein the dynamics and relationships were re-established, and a now more ship-savvy public began to catch on to and react to some of the chemistry in play, as well as become more vocal about numerous headcanons and theories that had long circulated. And people were indeed primed, because in production already were standalone animated films, which had begun to roll out in the late 90s. 2002 was also the year of the live-action Scooby Doo film directed by Roger Gosnell with screenplay by James Gunn, and the chemistry between certain characters was one of the questions asked to both the director, staff, and the actors. More on that later. Since then, Scooby Doo has had series in near continuous production, running pretty much back to back, with the odd couple-year gap here and there. These series have been produced in various styles and tones, and some are more subversive than others. The most recent ones being, from 2010 to 2013, there was Scooby Doo Mystery Incorporated. From 2015 to 2018, there was Be Cool Scooby Doo. And in 2019, there will be an iteration airing called Scooby Doo and Guess Who. This will be the 13th animated series in this franchise, and will heavily feature crossovers and celebrity cameos. All of this has been laid out to demonstrate there is a lot of Scooby Doo out there, and many different versions of Daphne and Velma, though thankfully the portrayals remain pretty constant throughout all of these different adaptations, so the dynamics at play are fairly consistent. What differs most are backstories and series tone, especially whether the monsters are real or not. So with all of that as a backdrop, let's get to Scooby Doo's shipping realm. Now Scooby Doo has long had ships, though how vocal people have been about them has changed, and it is one of those rare fandoms where they are fairly evenly distributed. And there is not that much adversity between them. In fact, most find them all fairly plausible, and in various iterations there have been different pairings that have come forth, though they tend to stick along the perceived dynamics of the original 60s run. Although, as mentioned, there is some fine crossover fare. In fact, the first video on this channel was about the canon pairing of Johnny Bravo and Velma Dinkley. So in a way, Scooby Doo launched this channel. Thanks, Scooby. Now, when it comes to Velma and Daphne, while it has long existed, it has definitely gained more traction over time. And this has occurred in various different avenues. And its transformative works have increased post-revival series and live-action film, largely because of the newfound ease of access supported by the internet, allowing people to spread their viewpoints and headcanons with ease. This rise also happened to be preceded just slightly by the femme/renaissance. For while male-male pairings have their renaissance back in the 60s with Kirk and Spock, for femme/ that occurs with Xena in the 90s. Xena and Gabrielle, that is. And so many came to realize that Daphne and Velma were actually an iconic couple, and the subtext or perceived subtext in their relationship was interpreted by many through a queer lens, largely because of Velma. Now, Velma is a fan favorite of many people. People admire her intelligence, quiet beauty, and ability to be herself, and her dedication to her own brand of femininity. Archetypical as it may have begun, it was rare to see the female nerd depicted so positively, without a constant push towards either a makeover or coupling. Not that she never displayed any attraction, it simply wasn't the focus of her character. As a result, some of her traits, as well as being a general icon and nerd icon, she has become a lesbian icon, with a popular read being that she was a closeted lesbian. A read many embraced happily, as she was such an inspiring, motivating character. Now, while some resist this read, as not wearing makeup, having short hair, and not being boy crazy doesn't automatically connote one's sexuality, others view it as coding, or at least willing to entertain it in a fanon sense, though some are now pushing for it to be canon. Because of this read, the question became, well, who does Velma like? And for many, the answer was simple: Daphne. While near opposites on the outside in terms of performing their femininity, the two were never set up as rivals within the show, except for outlier occasions, and even then it was an internal conflict that did not affect their relationship over much. For everyone in the Scooby Gang is on good, if not initially very fleshed out terms. While people often pitted the girls against each other in the typical which one is hotter argument, it was often lacking the underlying concept that made either of them lesser because of it. This seems to be because all of the team's archetypes worked together to create a balanced unit. The two girls got along well and gave the impression they would get along just fine without their male counterparts, and that they could even partake in each other's interests, of which there was overlap. And as the series have evolved, that element has simply grown. Their personalities lined up well too. Velma's more measured coolness and curiosity, a compliment to Daphne's more charge-ahead nature. Both were keen to examine clues and get whatever mystery they encountered solved. And fans felt that both of these women could help each other boost their self-esteem in the areas where the other may be lacking. In short, that they balanced each other out. Now, as the series is, especially the early ones, weren't overly detailed, shippers contented themselves with small moments and their own fleshed out backstories, until the Scooby Gang reappeared on screen with a vengeance. What's New Scooby Doo provide each character with a more distinct personality, though not as distinct as they would grow to be later on, and sequences of the gang and the girls hanging out outside of mystery settings became more common, and as a result, fans were off, and the moments grew. People began to want to see Daphne bring Velma out of her shell a little bit, and a greater emphasis was placed on the duo's competency in dire situations, and the concept of Velma's secret sexuality grew. One of the largest eye-openers for many shippers was the Scooby Doo movie of 2002, wherein fans noticed what appeared to be numerous moments that could definitely be read through a romantic lens between these two characters, a confirmation or revelation for older fans and an introduction for some younger ones. And Velma's sexuality was a factor, as evidenced by some behind-the-scenes interviews, some at the time and some that have emerged as recently as 2017. And for fans who noticed these moments, they were not your imagination, as the original Scooby Doo film was rated R and had a heavier emphasis on Velma's sexuality, with Lillard, who played Shaggy, stating, "We played on all those things. Is Velma gay? Is Shaggy high? Are Fred and Daphne hooking up?" All those jokes were in there, but we found at the end of the day it was more important to go the other way, and that was to be more family-oriented. Gunn, who wrote the screenplay, added that he was pretty sure she's gay. So we had a couple little nods to that in the movie, and in the end, again, they were things that kind of detracted from the scenes. The scenes in question that spring to mind for many are actually deleted scenes. One a locker room sequence with Daphne and Velma, the other a song sequence wherein a supposedly drunk Velma serenades a rapt audience, though seems to be pointedly singing to Daphne. Cardellini, who portrayed Velma in the films, had a slightly different view, stating, "There were a few scenes where Velma comes out of her shell. I wouldn't say she comes out of the closet. I thought more along the lines that maybe her sexuality is a little ambiguous." Though years later, it did come out that an early draft of the script had a sequence where Velma kissed Daphne, but it was cut for a PG rating. The scenes were also cut because of how sexy they made Velma, which some felt was against type, as she was not the quote-unquote hot one, and indeed her cleavage had to be CGI to a more appropriate level in some sequences. Regardless, the discussion was definitely opened, and it became clear to many that there were a fair few people who felt that this was plausible, and subsequent portrayals as a result have only seen the gang get more nuanced and more backstory and more shipped. Now the discussion has begun to shift as to whether or not this should be made canon. Now some are resistant because they feel that many of the reads placed upon Scooby Doo are actually fan projections. Indeed, the author of The Same Thing We Do Every Night, signifying same-sex desire in television cartoons, Jeffrey P. Dennis, stated, "It's mostly wishful thinking because Velma and Daphne barely acknowledge each other's existence." This being in response to numerous readings popping up about Scooby Doo actually being a cartoon about two queer couples. Though of course times have changed, and so have many of the portrayals and what people want out of them, though some feel it would be an imposition of fanon and more based on shippers' desires than true canon basis or a true cry for representation. And some feel that making it concrete for any pairings takes away from the team dynamic, as many are fans of a more gen iteration of Scooby Doo, and enjoy a more team as family dynamic or just friendship, and feel that there are many ways to read the text, and that when one confirms any read, it ultimately ends up supplanting others, especially with the modern at the time of this recording tendency to bully het shippers should a canon queer couple be presented, and they have a het headcanon or a het ship that was previously canon, as many today fear anything that could create a fraught fan environment, which seems sadly quite easy to trigger, and Scooby Doo has been a fandom that to date has managed to avoid most of that, and many would like to keep it that way. Though some argue there are so many iterations of Scooby Doo out there, it really shouldn't make too many ripples. This came to a head with the prequel film that was said to be the film occurring before the 2002 film franchise, Daphne and Velma, released in 2018, and produced by Ashley and Jennifer Tisdale's production company, a film that was going to focus solely on the two female leads and eliminate the rest of the gang altogether. While some were put out by this, it is important to note that this is not the first time the Scooby Doo franchise has done this. The talk swirling around this film before its release was that the film should be about the two as a couple, and to get these two out of the closet, and that it was time to acknowledge the team's diverse sexualities. However, that was not what the film ultimately ended up doing, nor in all fairness was it ever what it purported to do. Indeed, the reactions to this film is fascinating on a shipping, fan, and general level, worthy of analysis in its own right. Despite this film not giving much canon fodder, the discussion continues, and fans continue to support this couple, finding moments and enjoying the various renditions of these two, and they continue to be an iconic and historic couple for many queer fans, and just fans in general. So why not ship these two outside of already mentioned factors, such as a lack of on-screen interaction or chemistry? While some as always prefer the friendship approach, and feel dynamic female friendships, especially between two seemingly different women who would at a time have typically been shown as rivals or enemies, is important. Others are of course fans of other pairings, the more popular amongst them being Velma and Shaggy and Daphne and Fred, though there are variations, and as mentioned, fans of the platonic, which brings us to an oft pushed aside or unacknowledged sexuality headcanon for Velma, that of an asexual Velma Dinkley. Some feel that her initial lack of interest in romance or overt sexual behavior indicates asexuality, and that Velma is married to her studies, and solving mysteries. As for future romantic leanings, they note that asexuality does not automatically connote aromanticism, and ask that people remember that there are a wide array of ways to read each character, though some are resistant to this reading as they feel that it is too stereotypical, and continues along the lines of the asexual woman is frigid. Some also fear that this pairing tends towards fetishization, that being that some people enjoy it for their own sexual gratification. Others argue even if that is the case, that there can be more to that enjoyment than what's on the surface. And others argue that even if that is the case, there's nothing wrong with it, as having a fetish does not connote one's real-world behavior, or at least it doesn't have to. Others are not fans of how a lot of these discussions tend to ignore Daphne, and use her as more of an accessory to Velma. She is in the view of some used as a means for Velma to explore her sexuality, and there's less of a focus on her as a character, and many feel that Daphne needs a little more love, not even in a shipping sense, but in a character sense. However, again, this is one of the more pleasant fandoms to be a part of, where the discourse, while enthusiastic, is largely positive, at least at the time of this recording. And many fans are simply appreciative that people are still producing works for Scooby Doo in a variety of forms, as Scooby Doo also has comics, and some are quite interesting, and if one is looking for shippable material, also can provide some fodder, although more rarely, as many are aimed towards a very young demographic, and are more focused on the power of friendship. But moments still happen for the shipping inclined, and others are just, well, they're interesting. For any who want a real tonal shift, check out Scooby Doo Apocalypse. And if you're intrigued by any of this, take a dive into the world of constant, yet not overwhelmingly large, Scooby Doo shipping. So you've made it to the end, and that means it's question time. Get ready. Do you like Scooby Doo? And if so, which of the many versions is your favorite? Which version do you think provides the most shipping fodder for any pairing? And finally, what is your Scooby Doo ship? If you have any, that is. Let me know down below. Numbered if you can. You know I love a good essay comment. I'm a Scooby Doo multi-shipper myself, but not many share my main ship. That's alright. I'll keep on keeping on. Also, here's a picture of me as Velma for Halloween for no reason. You're welcome. If you haven't already, please do subscribe and hit that bell notification so that you never miss a vid. There's always vids coming out here. Shipping, most shippable moments, lists, gaming, streams, just a whole bunch of stuff. And it happens very sporadically. Schedules? What's that? Also, if you're ever watching these and you think a friend would be interested, please be sure to share it with them. You'd be amazed how much that helps. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of you guys taking some time out of your day to chit-chat about fandom. It's always a good time. As mentioned, there is much more coming up soon, so stay tuned, and I'll see you all soon after the outro. Bye-bye. This has been Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Special thanks to all of my patrons, names on the side, and the vote for next month's video is ongoing at the time of this recording, so please go check that out if you haven't already. As always, much more to come, so please stay tuned for there are as many ships out there as there are stars in the sky.